President Yoon today gave a budget speech to Parliament calling for bipartisan support for his administration's belt-tightening, as he says he'll focus more on people's livelihoods. He also met rival party leader Lee Jae-myung for talks amid tense political circumstances. Industrial production, spending, and investment all rose last month in South Korea, thanks to semiconductors recovering. Israel intensifies ground fighting in Gaza, while its Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu rejects the idea of a ceasefire. It's October 31st, 2023. This is News Center. Good evening. Thank you for joining us. I'm Yoon Jung-min. President Yoon Suk-yeol addressed the National Assembly earlier today to explain and ask support for the government's budget proposal for next year, worth some $487 billion. As it was last year, tightening spending was the basis of the plan, with a focus on people's livelihoods. Also, what caught attention today was the president meeting with opposition leader Lee Jae-myung for talks amid tense political circumstances. Our top office correspondent Kim Do-yeon begins our coverage.
Fiscal soundness is the basis for the government's budget proposal for the year 2024, according to President Yoon Suk-yeol on Tuesday at the National Assembly as he addressed the parliament.
건전 재정은 단순히 지출을 줄이는 것만이 아니고 국민의 혈세를 낭비 없이 적재적소에 효율적으로 쓰는 것입니다. 건전 재정은 대내적으로는 물가 안정에, 대외적으로는 국가 신인도를 유지하는 데 매우 중요할 뿐 아니라 미래 세대에게 감당하기 어려운 빚을 넘겨주지 않기 위한 것입니다.
In fact, the whole budget, which stands at 657 trillion won or 487 billion US dollars, increased by 2.8% on year. That's the lowest increase since 2005. And Yoon explained the funds saved will be redirected to enhance the nation's core functions such as defense, rule of law, education, health, support for the vulnerable, and securing future growth engines. To be specific, 1.1 billion US dollars additionally allocated for basic living recipients with support for one-parent homes and multicultural children. He also took the opportunity to share his general agenda, saying all policies will prioritize stabilizing prices and improving people's livelihoods amid global uncertainties from conflicts in the Middle East and Ukraine. The word economy was mentioned 23 times in his 25-minute speech. The word reform also came up 14 times as he urged support for his three key reformation targets to the majority opposition floor, saying they're for the future of the country, including the critically low birth rate.
저출산이라는 어둠의 터널에서 빠져나오려면 미래 세대에게 희망을 주고 우리 사회의 지속 가능한 성장을 가능케 하는 경제 사회 전반의 구조 개혁이 필요합니다. 이러한 연금 개혁, 노동 개혁, 교육 개혁을 위해 의원님들의 깊은 관심과 지원을 부탁드리겠습니다.
Leading up to the speech, much attention was paid to Yoon's scheduled meeting with main opposition Democratic Party's dignitaries and Chairman Lee Jae-myung. A different scene compared to last year's budget speech when all 169 DP lawmakers boycotted it and no such meetings were held.
Since I became the Speaker of the National Assembly, I believe this is the first time that the President, chairpersons from both ruling and opposition parties, and the floor leaders, as well as leaders of all branches of the government, have gathered in one place. That's why it seems many media outlets and citizens are paying close attention to our meeting today.
Following the speech, Yoon also had a meeting and luncheon with committee chairs. There, he promised to reflect the words of lawmakers as he carries out policies. Kim Do-yeon, Arirang News.
Findings for the month of September show Korea's industrial output, retail sales, and facility investment all gained on month thanks to semiconductors recovering. This likely have bolstered an overall sense of market optimism. Park Go-nu has more.
South Korea's overall industrial production, spending, and investments all saw a jump in September. According to data released by Statistics Korea on Tuesday, the total industrial production increased 1.1% in September compared to the month before. This was mainly due to increased production in the mining and manufacturing sectors of 1.8% on month.
As mining and manufacturing production increased by 3.1% in quarter two and 1.9% in the third quarter, it seems like a positive sign of recovery in the second half of the year compared to the first half.
Although auto production plunged in September, chip production, including memory semiconductors, rose around 13% compared to August, driving growth in the industry. The service industry was also up by 0.4% due to rises in the wholesale and retail sector, while sports and leisure saw a drop. Retail sales, which is a key gauge of private spending, jumped on month, especially as sales of food and beverages and cosmetics increased. A Statistics Korea official said food and beverages saw an increase during the Chuseok holiday period. Infrastructure investment also saw an increase of over 8%, as investment in machinery and transportation equipment both jumped. Park Gon-woo, Arirang News.
Samsung Electronics has made public its third quarter business report card, and it shows a remarkable operating profit compared to the previous quarters of this year, as the company trimmed losses in semiconductors and made profit in smartphones. Moon Hae-ryun reports.
South Korean tech giant Samsung Electronics finally surpassed the trillion Korean won mark for its operating profits for the first time this year, despite a sluggish time for the chip sector. On Tuesday, the company reported an operating profit of just under 2.5 trillion won for the third quarter of the year, which at the current rate is around $1.86 billion. While this is more than a 77% drop compared to the same period last year, it's a vast improvement compared to the previous quarters this year. In the first quarter, the firm recorded an operating profit of just over 640 billion Korean won, or $475 million, followed by 668.5 billion Korean won, or $496 million. Sales in the third quarter fell by over 12% on year. These latest figures were mainly attributed to high performance in the mobile and display sector and a lower than expected deficit in the company's semiconductor division. Samsung's DS division, which deals with chips, reported that they were $2.78 billion in the red in the third quarter, marking the third quarter in a row that it has recorded a deficit. However, owing to the rising average sales price of DRAM chips, the deficit was around $445 million lower than the previous quarter. The latest figures released by Statistics Korea on the same day show that semiconductor production in South Korea jumped by nearly 13% on month in September, showing that demand for chips is continuing to improve and the firm can expect to continue its recovery in the final quarter of the year. Meanwhile, Samsung's MX division, made up of mobile communications and consumer electronics, patched up the losses made in the chip sector, with its foldable smartphones Galaxy Z Flip 5 and Fold 5, as well as wearable devices showing continued popularity. The display division also reported a large jump in profits with its small to medium-sized panels. Moon Hae-ryun, Arirang News.
The Korean government is speeding up implementing follow-up measures to ensure that the second Middle East boom produces economic value that will benefit the country as a whole. That's according to Finance Minister Chu Kyung-ho on Tuesday as he presided over a related ministers' meeting. Chu added that the follow-up measures will be in 5 key areas, namely energy, infrastructure, new industries, exports, and investment. Some measures include storing 5.3 million barrels of Saudi crude oil by 2028 and cooperating to produce clean energy sources such as hydrogen. South Korea has so far won nearly $80 billion worth of contracts and deals in the Middle East. South Korea's terms of trade increased for the fourth month in a row in September as import prices fell at a faster rate than export prices. According to the Bank of Korea on Tuesday, the country's net terms of trade index for goods rose by 4.5% compared to the same month last year, coming to 87.25. The index is an indicator of how much a country can buy in imports for every unit of its exports. The rise was attributed to the base effect of high oil prices last year. The drop in import prices at just under 10% when oil price settled was greater than the decline in export prices at just over 5%. But as oil prices rise with the ongoing conflict in the Middle East, watchers say this effect is predicted to wear off. Today, October 31st, is Halloween. It's been a year since the deadly Halloween crowd crush in Itaewon. To find out how the scene has changed, we connect to reporter Shin Sebyok. Sebyok, tell us where you are and what's it like out there.
Jungmin, I am in Hongdae, one of the hottest and trendiest nightlife areas in Seoul. It's around 6:10 p.m. on the night of Halloween, and the streets are getting crowdier despite the fact that it's a Tuesday. The local authorities anticipated a bit of a crowd picking up at around 7 to 8 p.m. Despite being a weekday, Halloween appears to be calmer and quieter compared to previous year, especially when you think about the tragic incident in Itaewon last year when 159 lives were lost. I've had a chance to chat with a few people in Hongdae, and it's clear that the mood is different.
Before the tragic accident last year, my friends used to suggest going out to places like Itaewon or Hongdae for Halloween. But now the whole let's go out vibe has really died down. I'm not too keen on heading out either.
I see fewer people wearing Halloween costumes this year. It's also less hustle and bustle overall.
Sebyok, still, it seems there are quite a few people out on the streets.
Absolutely. Despite the solar mood, you can still feel the Halloween spirits in some places. You can find decorations like skulls, ghosts, and pumpkins, and even people wearing costumes. So usually Halloween peaks during the weekend just before the actual day. Last weekend in Hongdae, there was quite a crowd. According to the Mapogu district office, approximately 260,000 people visited Hongdae over the 3 days from Friday to Sunday last week. It's a 50% increase in visitors compared to other usual weekends. And today the district office is gearing up for an influx, expecting up to 50,000 people.
And what efforts are being made out there to prevent accidents due to population density?
So both the central and local authorities are making extra preparations to prevent the recurrence of the Itaewon tragedy. From October 27th to tomorrow, the Seoul Metropolitan Government is keeping a close eye on 16 areas across 12 districts, including popular spots like Itaewon, Hongdae, and Gangnam. Seoul City and 25 local districts, together with safety-related agencies like the police and fire department, are jointly monitoring crowd density to ensure everyone's safety using AI-powered crowd management systems. Medical facilities as well as medics and ambulances are on standby. Halloween may be over after today, but the government is bracing for upcoming year-end festivities nationwide. In response, the government is set to expand safety measures. Prime Minister Han Duck-soo said last week that the government plans to implement on-site crowd management systems at 100 locations nationwide by the end of the year. Now back to you, Jungmin.
Our Shin Se-byuk reporting live from Hongdae. Thank you. Shifting gears, watchers say Israeli forces have taken a tactical approach in their ground incursions rather than a full-scale war. This as Israeli ground forces move deeper into Gaza, while its Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu rejects the idea of a ceasefire. An Sung-jin takes a look at how this is unfolding.
Israel's ground operation has intensified in Gaza. The Israeli Defense Forces announced that they struck approximately 300 Hamas targets in northern Gaza, exploding military compounds and underground tunnels. This comes as Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu rejects any talk of a ceasefire.
Calls for a ceasefire are calls for Israel to surrender to Hamas, to surrender to terrorism, to surrender to barbarism. That will not happen.
The Israeli military on Monday stated the killing of 4 prominent Hamas operatives and the rescue of an Israeli soldier whom Hamas kidnapped among more than 200 others during the October 7th attack. Private Ori Megidish, a female soldier monitoring the Gaza border, was rescued by Israeli Defense Forces in northern Gaza and is said to be well mentally and physically. Israel is strengthening ground operations in the Palestinian enclave as it searches for more hostages.
Israel intends to engage in ground operations bit by bit as they surround the strip just like the salami tactic. They'll search for hostages and destroy underground tunnels and booby traps as they use artillery in limited areas to refrain from hit-or-miss bombing.
Rather than rushing in, the Israeli Defense Forces aim to reduce the number of casualties. This tactic could allow Israel to dodge direct criticism.
If Israel engages in a full-scale invasion, and if there are any hostage casualties from their bombing, condemnation from the rest of the world will be inevitable. Instead, they decided on military ground operations, which will pressure Hamas and also place the moral responsibility of killings on them.
Israeli forces are said to push deeper into Gaza, yet this raises concerns as countries fear a spillover into a broader regional conflict. An Sung-jin, Arirang News.
South Korea's Joint Chief of Staff says it is hard to predict when North Korea will conduct its third attempt to launch a spy satellite. In a press briefing today, a military spokesperson said staff are monitoring the situation but added that it's difficult to tell when the regime will go for a launch. Another military officer says that if the North manages to speedily resolve its technological issues with help from Russia, it may be able to carry out the launch next month. But if it needs a lot of help more, it could take longer. Earlier in August, the North failed in its second attempt to launch a spy satellite as the rocket crashed into the sea. Pyongyang then immediately announced that it would make a third attempt in October. But with less than a day left this month, it's unlikely that the regime will be able to meet its own deadline. This week, Seoul and Washington are engaged in a large-scale air drill, and pundits believe Pyongyang may resort to provocations in protest like missile launches. Our defense correspondent Choi Min-jung reports.
Seoul and Washington are currently conducting round-the-clock aerial drills dubbed Vigilant Defense in the skies around the Korean peninsula. The 5-day exercise, which kicked off Monday, involved some 130 South Korean and U.S. aircraft, including Seoul's F-35A fighters, the E-737 airborne early warning and control aircraft, and the KC-330 transport plane, as well as Washington's F-35A and F-35B fighters. The exercise is aimed at enhancing the Allies' combined operational capabilities against North Korea's military provocations.
South Korea and the U.S. Air Force plan to master wartime operation procedures and check operational capabilities.
This is being done through drills which include combat formation, defensive counter-air drills, airborne alert interdiction, and close air support operations. Colonel Kang Geun-shin, the director of the exercise, had previously said the intensive training is similar to actual combat and will allow the Allies to respond to any provocation by the enemy. That being said, there is growing speculation that North Korea may stage missile launches in a show of discontent with the joint drills.
It is highly likely that North Korea will carry out various forms of provocation during this training period to create insecurity on the Korean peninsula.
North Korea, which has previously called such drills rehearsals for invasion, launched missiles during last year's Seoul-Washington joint air exercise. Choi Min-jung, Arirang News.
Arirang TV's Simply K-pop recently had the pleasure of hosting Norwegian pop star Peder Elias, much to the delight of his fans here and beyond. Our Yoon has the highlights and what's special about his visit.
Simply K-pop, also known as Simply Contour, is a live concert program broadcast by Arirang TV and hosted by Lee Dae-hwi. It features live performances by a variety of K-pop artists and plays an essential role as a platform to interact with fans and share music with an audience both in South Korea and internationally. In this week's episode, Norwegian pop star Peder Elias took to the stage as a special guest, where he shared his eagerness to connect with his dedicated fan base.
International artists. 안녕하세요. My name is Peder Elias. I am an artist, singer-songwriter from Norway, and I love being in Korea and playing shows and meeting all the beautiful people here, and excited to do this interview right now.
Peder has already secured fans across Southeast Asia and here in Korea, where his single Loving You Girl achieved chart success in 2021. This year, he returned to South Korea for a live concert and made a special visit to Arirang TV.
Then I also heard later that this was the show where international artists go as well, so then I thought that would be really cool.
Simply K-pop Contour is also seeking to make its shows more inclusive by producing special country-themed episodes where they invite fans from those countries to join the broadcast remotely. The show became a platform for Peder to share his music with an even broader audience.
I think it was almost like love at first sight. For me, it was kind of Koreans were the first people that really started listening to my music. So therefore, it was like natural kind of special bond because they changed a lot for me and gave me a lot of opportunities through discovering first my song Bonfire and later lots of more songs.
Over the years, Simply K-pop has hosted a range of K-pop artists, including global superstars like BTS, reaffirming its status as a stage where well-known K-pop artists and emerging talents come together to share their passion for music. Hosted and subtitled in multiple languages, the show airs worldwide every Friday and is streamed on YouTube every other Monday. 이은희, Arirang News.
The song 7 by BTS member Jungkook has set a record on Spotify for the shortest time to surpass 1 billion streams. It took the song 108 days from its release to reach the milestone on Monday. This is 4 days shorter than the previous record set by American singer-songwriter Miley Cyrus with her song Flowers. The song debuted at #1 on Spotify's global daily top songs chart back in July, making Jungkook the first K-pop solo artist to do so.
Mild and warm conditions will prevail again tomorrow. Most regions will see both morning and daytime temperatures surpassing the seasonal average. Tomorrow, Seoul will see highs of 22 degrees Celsius, which is about 6 degrees higher than the seasonal norms. This moderately warm weather will continue for the next few days. The rise in temperatures will bring unstable atmospheric conditions. This will produce on and off showers for the morning hours across central parts of the country. As for the overall amount of rainfall, northern Gyeonggi-do and Gangwon-do provinces will see 5 to 30 millimeters. The capital region and the surrounding areas will only see about 5. Along with the rain, parts of coastal regions will have gusty winds following, so please be extra careful out on the roads. Morning temperatures in Seoul and Busan will start off at 15 degrees. Parts of central regions will see rain continuing into the daytime. As for the daily highs, Seoul will get up to 22 degrees, Daejeon 23, Daegu and Busan will reach 24 degrees. Another round of rain is in store on Friday for central regions, and they will spread nationwide thereafter. Temperatures will take a steep dive after the rain. That's all for now, and here are the weather conditions around the world.
That is News Center for tonight. Thank you for watching. A panel session coming up.
Welcome.
엄청난 에너지를 춤으로 뿜어내는 나라. 감당할 수 있겠니?
한국에 오면 먹어야죠.
먹어도 끝이 없는 나라. 감당할 수 있겠니?
The president also remains committed to boosting Korea's ties with its global partners on the sidelines of this latest.
To discuss the current security environment.
The United Nations most powerful body on global security, expressing hope.
Stock markets around the world have taken a hit amid speculation that the U.S. Federal Reserve
Arirang. Korea hydro and nuclear power envisions a world flowing with energy as clean as the blue skies, where we can enjoy energy without worrying about the planet by finding new alternative sources to achieve carbon neutrality through clean, carbon-free energy. KHNP is creating a new future for a carbon-free world. Korea hydro and nuclear power.
Welcome.
엄청난 에너지를 춤으로 뿜어내는 나라. 감당할 수 있겠니?
한국에 오면 먹어야죠.
먹어도 먹어도 끝이 없는 나라. 감당할 수 있겠니?
Hello everyone, it's Tuesday and you're watching Within the Frame. I'm Kim Boo-kyung. Ever since the Hamas militants stormed Israeli towns on October 7th, tension in the Middle East has been growing, with the Israeli Prime Minister even saying that there will be no ceasefire and that it is a time for war. Amid such tensions, there has been intense scrutiny of North Korea's linkage to militant non-state actors in the region, especially Hamas. North Korean weaponry was being seen and used by Hamas, and its so-called unconventional tactics too have been showing similarities to what North Korea has been using. How does an expert see the linkage between the two? And is there any possibility that Pyongyang would use such tactics against North Korea? For more on this, we have invited a very special guest, Bruce Bennett, Senior Defense Analyst at Rand Corporation. Welcome to the show, Dr. Bennett.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you for being with us, Dr. Bennett. Now, first question to you. 38 North pointed out the long history of North Korea supplying arms to militant non-state actors, especially Hamas. Could you tell us more about this partnership?
Well, we don't know all the details, obviously. That's very, very much kept secret by them. But we know there's been participation. Look, the North Koreans will sell weapons to just about anybody. That was one of the ways they make hard currency. They also send their soldiers overseas to help train other groups. Because that gives problems to the United States. And so that's very positive as far as they're concerned. But having said that, they also learn how their weapons work. You know, you can have all kinds of experiments with weapons to destroy buildings or whatever, but to see how they interact with people and what happens, that's the laboratory that North Korea tries to take advantage of.
Right, I see. Well, Dr. Bennett, the evidence of such a long partnership and such providing of North Korea's weapons has been seen in the current Israel-Hamas war as well, as a number of North Korean weapons were seen among munitions seized by Hamas. Could you tell us what they were?
Well, we know some of the weapons, certainly. The most significant one that we see regularly referred to is what's called a rocket-propelled grenade. It's essentially a standoff weapon that allows you to fire an explosive into a crowd of people, against an armored vehicle, whatever. And that's very clearly seems to be a North Korean weapon that they're using. But we've also found artillery with North Korean markings on it. They've seen other weapon systems that seem to have come from North Korea. So this is a pattern of fairly extensive support. Even the gliders that were used by the Hamas personnel to go into Israel could well have come from North Korea, or at least the training has. So there's an extensive support that's going on.
All right, I see. Now, though it is remaining quite cautious until now, Iran warned Israel, saying that it had crossed over the red lines and such an action may force everyone to act. If the war becomes extended, could North Korea in any way take part in?
Well, North Korean personnel probably haven't left Gaza. They're still probably there. So will they participate? Yes. Will they participate as observers and as advisors? Almost certainly. They are probably doing that right now. But will they become very heavily involved? Will they send more troops beyond just advisors? Probably not. Look, North Korea knows that Israel is very determined about attacking those that attack Israel. And the last thing Kim Jong-un wants to do is to put his own life at risk. The Israelis might be persistent enough to put him in jeopardy. And so I think he's going to be careful about that.
How about in terms of providing more weapons?
I think it's quite possible that they will provide more weapons. Certainly resupplied. I mean, look, the Hamas have been using lots of weapons against Israel, especially rockets. They're going to run out of supplies, and they're going to need them resupplied. And we know for years that North Korea has been sending large amounts. There were 35 tons intercepted in 2009 going to Hamas. So we're not just talking about a couple launchers. We're talking about huge quantities, and they probably need to be resupplied.
Right. So there is a high possibility that North Korea might supply the Hamas with more weapons. I see. Yes. Well, Dr. Bennett, when Hamas infiltrated Israel, it did so in a surprise dawn attack, overwhelming Israel's Iron Dome with a barrage of rockets and using drones as well. And some say such unconventional methods could have been similar to the North Korea's. What's your view on this?
Well, we have to remember that however many launchers Hamas has, North Korea has about 7,000 artillery pieces and rocket launchers in the forward area. If on average they fire, say, 30 rounds in an hour, which is probably at the low end, that implies we're talking about 200,000 rounds. You know, Hamas was talking about thousands of rounds they fired. North Korea could be talking about hundreds of thousands. So that's a saturation kind of attack that really would have substantial implications. But North Korea is not going to do that unless they really are planning on a major war. They could do something far more limited. There are many targets for South Korea that are in the forward area that they could go after on a more limited basis, hoping to limit the responses that South Korea would make.
So you're saying it is possible that North Korea could use this kind of tactic, but it's not going to use it until if it's not a war, right?
No, if it's not a major war, yeah. I mean, now, could they try to overwhelm a particular facility, a particular military base? Absolutely. But they don't have to fire that much to do that.
Right, I see. Well, one more. The use of paragliders and underground tunnels is also reported to have been transferred from North Korea. What's your view on this?
I think it's entirely possible that they have. I mean, you know, Hamas was looking at ways in which they could infiltrate into Israel. They didn't know for sure that they were going to be able to shut down the electronic systems, the ability of Israel to control the forward area. And so they were looking for ways to insert people otherwise. So the hang gliders, that was something that I'm sure they were looking for someone to help them, and North Korea has been doing that. We can't document that I am aware of that North Korea actually provided those, but I think it's a fairly good likelihood that they would have done that.
Well, this makes me wonder, Dr. Bennett, how have North Korea been using this kind of things? I mean, hang gliders and the underground tunnels.
Well, underground tunnels, of course, have been used by North Korea forever. My first trip to Korea in 1990, I went looking at tunnels with the tunnel neutralization team that existed at that time. Their belief was every North Korean division in the forward area had dug a tunnel. That would be 20-some tunnels under the DMZ. We found 4 that I know of. So that's a very limited number for those that actually exist. This is something that North Korea doesn't just do in the forward area. We're told that North Korea probably has 10,000 or so underground locations where they store weapons and other equipment. So going into North Korea would be a nightmare trying to get it under control. And they've tried to replicate that in other places. They've helped Iran. They've probably been helping Hamas build their tunnels. This is something that they do because if you're out in the open, the U.S. and allied air forces can do a good job at stopping your operations.
Right, I see your point. Well, Dr. Bennett, the reason why we're talking about this is because we have concerns over the possibility of North Korea using similar offensives against South Korea. What are the chances, in your opinion?
Well, I actually just recently wrote an op-ed on this subject.
Really?
My comment was, if you want to deter someone, you can deter them by making it impossible, or you can deter them by imposing costs on them that they're unwilling to accept. I think South Korea has made it very clear to North Korea that if you do something as extreme as killing 1,000 South Koreans, Kim Jong-un's chance of surviving is not high. South Korea is prepared to respond to that kind of thing. They know that the thing Kim cares about is his own life and control of the country. So there is a clear threat that South Korea has produced to refer to the Korean massive punishment and retaliation that Korea is prepared to do. That's a very important deterrent to stop the Hamas-style attack. But it only works as long as North Korea doesn't have enough nuclear weapons to neutralize that approach. You know, North Korea appears, from what Kim Jong-un has said, to be shooting for 300 to 500 nuclear weapons. When they even get up to 200 or so, they're going to feel much more comfortable doing conventional attacks because they know that if we retaliate too much, they could go nuclear, and we're going to be very concerned about that. That effect is referred to as a nuclear shadow, and that is a very concerning factor that we're letting North Korea continue to develop nuclear weapons, and that's very dangerous.
I see. Dr. Bennett, you already mentioned how South Korea is fully prepared for North Korea's such attacks, but South Korea is already re-evaluating its own ability to thwart a similar North Korean offensive. What more could be done, in your opinion?
Well, we also have to step back and say, if North Korea is not going to do something like Hamas did, what other things could they do? North Korea could infiltrate special forces and go after very vulnerable targets. One of the things that Kim Jong-un learned in 2010 when they sank the Chonan warship and shelled Yeonpyeong Island, their key objective was to split the South Korean populace. Okay? When they shelled Yeonpyeong Island, they didn't do that. The South Korean populace was unified, saying we need to do something about North Korea. But when they sank the Chonan, they did split the populace. So this deniability of an attack is very important, I think, to Kim Jong-un for now, until he gets that nuclear forces cover. But that's key. I think he thinks that even today he could try to do that. And he's in trouble. He's tried to break our alliance by launching lots of missiles, and instead he's made it stronger. And that's going to be very hard for him to explain to his people. He can't just pull back and say, oh, well, I goofed, sorry, guys. And so what he's likely to do is to escalate. And so we need to be concerned that he could do some kind of conventional attack, but I suspect more likely it's a deniable kind.
All right, I see. Well, Dr. Bennett, shifting gears a little bit here. So due to such worries over North Korea's nuclear and missile threats, there was discussion about strengthening South Korea's defensive posture. And this led to South Korean President Yoon Suk-yeol and U.S. President Joe Biden's agreement of Washington Declaration. But some say that this is not detailed enough. What's your view?
I tend to agree with that perspective. I mean, if you look at it, we face a very different environment. When we were in the Cold War, we had extensive literature and analysis of what the Soviets could do and how we needed to be prepared to respond to it. This whole nuclear situation for North Korea is a different world. Some of the literature is still right, but some of it's wrong. And so we need to have much more extensive testing, concept development. The South Korean people need to know how serious the threat really is. You know, one nuclear weapon going off in Seoul could kill several million people. So this is not a case where we can feel comfortable with North Korea having 50 or more nuclear weapons. As a result, what we need from the Nuclear Consultative Group is much more extensive study and evaluation of the threats, giving us options for responding, helping us to know how to handle them. And the way you do that is with wargaming. You get some group of experts to play North Korea, another group to play US and ROK, And they test out different scenarios, and they ask, does this work? Does that work? And then they can give the senior decision makers alternatives so that they're better prepared. And that's one of the steps at this stage that needs to be part of the Washington Declaration. But, you know, we seem to be at a very small scale at this stage. We ought to be doing dozens of games a month. And that's not part of what seems to be being done at this stage.
Then you must be very supportive of how South Korea and the U.S. is trying to do more joint exercises, right?
Oh, absolutely. The exercises clearly are frustrating Kim Jong-un. They're clearly telling him, you know, you can launch more missiles, but we're going to do stronger and better exercises. Probably not a good idea. And so he pauses in his missile launches. Now, he could restart, but the exercises are important. I look at a situation and I say, if I were a coach of an all-star soccer team, okay, I wouldn't tell my players, look, the other team doesn't want us to practice because they think we could beat them. So you guys are not allowed to practice. And the problem, of course, is if it's an all-star team, they've never played with each other. They don't know how to work with each other to be effective. And so you've got to have them out there training and exercising and working together. And that's one of the key importances of the exercises that we do as military forces.
All right, I see your point. Well, Dr. Bennett, coming back to the Washington Declaration, Rand in the Arirang Institute for Policy Studies recently came up with a report entitled Options for Strengthening Republic of Korea's Nuclear Assurance. What were the options?
Well, we actually raised several dozen options, so I'm not going to be able to cover all of them here.
Just a few.
But a few of them, I think the notion of extensive wargaming, concept formulation are key. Helping the South Korean and other people understand the nature of the threat is important. There hasn't been a lot of nuclear training, even in the U.S., in 30 years. And so our military, our national security experts need that. But then we go on to looking at North Korea, the danger we talked about before of once they get enough nuclear weapons, the world becomes safe for conventional warfare. We don't want that. And so what can we do to stop the North Korean development program? Maybe not drive them back to zero. That's probably not possible. But at least cause them to pause and not continue building. And I think there are both incentives we could offer, but there are also punishments that we could pose. We have to remember, Kim Jong-un said a couple of years ago, K-pop is a vicious cancer. That is corrupting the morals of his younger generation, and if it continues, it could cause the regime to collapse like a damp wall. So there he was. He identified the very thing we could use as a weapon against him. Outside information, but especially K-pop, something that attracts people. Are we doing that? I don't see it going on. I think we could be far more proactive about sending information in. We know his elites are not entirely happy with what's going on in the North. Even they aren't eating all that well. And so we have the potential to use outside information and to threaten Kim and say, look, if you do this, you know, you do a 7th nuclear test, we are going to send 1 million USB drives into Pyongyang area with K-pop and K-dramas and so forth on them. We know you'll police up a bunch of them, but enough will survive that you're not going to like the outcome.
All right, so you need to be far more proactive. Interesting.
Exactly.
Right. Well, Dr. Bennett, I know that you have already gave us options suggested by both of the institutes, but the discussion over the need for South Korea to deploy itself with the tactical nuclear weapons might not just fade away. And if it is brought up again, what would be your view on such a discussion?
Well, the whole purpose of our report was to say, what can we do so that South Korea doesn't feel forced to produce their own nuclear weapons? Part of our report says, here are the implications of South Korea doing that. Something simple like, if you produce your own nuclear weapons, you need to leave the Non-Proliferation Treaty. If you leave the Non-Proliferation Treaty, you no longer have access to outside uranium. There's a nuclear supplier group, they're not going to give you uranium. What does that do to your nuclear power plants? Not just for weapons. What happens if outside countries decide to impose sanctions on South Korea because it's gone nuclear? So there's lots of dangers associated with South Korea going nuclear. The key in our minds is we have to provide, the U.S. has to work with South Korea to provide the people's assurance. Now, back in the 1960s, when the U.S. was trying to assure our NATO allies, we were worried that Germany in particular might go nuclear, and that could cause a real fissure in NATO. And so we told the European countries, we are going to dedicate a significant number of nuclear weapons to supporting NATO. We dedicated all of our initial ballistic missile submarines to support NATO. Even today, we still maintain 400 warheads on ballistic missile submarines to support NATO. We dedicated at that time bomber warheads to support NATO. So identifying ways that we can support Korea in the same kind of manner is one of the kinds of things we think is essential so that the Korean people feel like they have some degree of assurance.
All right, I see your point. Now, Dr. Bennett, I'd like to ask you many more questions, but I believe this will be our last one. Right now, South Korea is taking quite a stern posture, defensive posture against North Korea, with the defense minister even saying the need to suspend the September 19th military agreement. What's your take on such a position, and what should the country's diplomatic strategy be to improve the tension on the peninsula?
I remember when the agreement was initially announced, and I was talking with my U.S. colleagues here in Korea, and their reaction was horror.
Really?
Because think about it, if indeed one of the soldiers up in the Panmunjom area, one of the American soldiers, has appendicitis, we can't fly a helicopter up there to evacuate him. So there are things about it, I mean, and that's just a very practical. There's reconnaissance implications and so forth. So there are reasons why that agreement doesn't necessarily provide the environment we want. But are we just going to abandon it? Maybe we should go to North Korea and say, look, you can have that agreement, or you can continue, and you stop producing nuclear weapons, or you can continue producing nuclear weapons and we abandon the agreement. Your choice. We've got to start being creative about how we try to leverage North Korea and get the threat under control.
I think I've never heard of advice to be creative. It's really interesting.
Well, it is, because all the old ideas people have thought about, talked about, and none of them sound very good. Now is time to be creative.
All right. Well, thank you for your advice, Dr. Bennett. Well, unfortunately, this is all the time we have for today's edition. Thank you for coming into the studio and sharing your thoughts. I really appreciate it.
My privilege. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, that's all for Within the Frame tonight. We'll be back tomorrow with more in-depth stories. Thank you for watching, and goodbye.
해외에서 경기가 있을 때마다 스스로 다짐하는 말이 있어요. 나는 대한민국을 대표하는 선수이기 전에 대한민국 국민이다. 해외에서 자부심을 갖는 가장 좋은 방법은 재외선거를 놓치지 않는 거죠. 인터넷으로 쉽고 간편하게 신고 신청할 수 있는 제22대 국회의원 재외선거.